Hardened Valencia just concluded, and I want to give a quick metagame minute over what happened for Silver Age. Going into the end of round 7 with our top 8 cut, it looks like we have a Briar at first and second seed. We have Ira, Chain, Bravo, Oldhim, Bravo, and Chain to round it out. I think that this kind of solidifies what most people believe the metagame is, with kind of like a triangle going on between Runeblade, Ira, and Guardian. Although I think that Chain operates on a different kind of axis compared to the way that Briar works. I don't think you can categorize them the exact same way. Needless to say, this is what we've been talking about on the channel for a few weeks now. I think Chain was the kind of X Factor deck that, at least speaking for myself, was something that was off my radar going into week 1. It's been performing very well, and spoiler alert for the finals, it was Chain versus Briar, with Chain winning. So it has had another very good performance. So I think at this point it is like solidified itself as a meta contender, and you need to take it seriously and test against it and have a plan for it. But other than Chain, I think that most players have been well aware of this metagame and have been expecting this for a while if you've been playing Project Blue or just following the channel coverage at all. I am interested that there are 2 copies of Bravo but only 1 copy of Oldhim. I'd be interested to see what the rationale was or why this one performed much better. I will say Arthur Trehay is absolutely insane at Flesh and Blood, so I think I'll just believe in whatever deck he picks. But to, of course, give more nuance to it, let's look beyond just the top 8. So if we look at the bubble here, we have 2 Iras just on the bubble. So, I mean, very reasonably, you could have 1 less copy of Bravo, 1 less copy of Chain, and you could have 3 copies of Briar in the top 8. This could have just been down to breakers. I'm not quite sure, but definitely that's interesting. But going down further, we see another copy of Bravo, and then we see Chain, Ira. So, I mean, even this top 12, top 13 is just solidifying these like kind of 4 pillars almost, like between Briar, Chain, Guardian, and then Ira. When you get all the way down to 14th, you finally see 1 copy of Azalea, and then kind of an interesting one is Icelander at top 16. When you go down even further, you only see the exact same heroes again. So I think that this is just really solidifying something important here. You go even further down, and it takes you all the way into top 32 with mainly just the 4 pillars represented in top 32. You have a couple of copies of Azalea and 1 copy of Icelander that broke in. So I definitely think this is pretty interesting. If you go outside, you see Dorinthia at 33rd. But I mean, if we're going that far out, I mean, top 32 I think is enough. If it's just this exact same meta all the way down to top 8 cut, I think it's pretty clear that we know what the metagame is for Silver Age at the moment until another breakout deck happens. I definitely think that players need to be figuring out what they're doing against Chain. The deck does pretty powerful stuff. While I do think you can disrupt it, I think it requires you to have specific sideboard game plans and actually have tested the matchup. So we'll have to see what people do. I'm adding this to the video. I forgot that I actually had this pulled up and just forgot to cover it, but I have the Fablazing data over the Battle Hardened. So we see Briar, Bravo, Oldhim, and Icelander actually have really high win rates for the event. Although Briar was only in 19 matches in total, so incredibly small sample size, I'm assuming that most of this was done by the player that made top 16, because outside of that, she completely disappears. So I'm not sure how many people were playing her. So really, I would only take this with a grain of salt for Icelander. Heroes with a higher representation of data here. It's actually pretty interesting that Ira has such a bad win rate into Briar, with a sub 40% win rate, barely having an edge against Chain, beating up Azalea, but it looks like Azalea overall was having kind of a hard time at the event, and then actually having a pretty bad win rate into Oldhim, but once again, very small sample size. This is less than 10 games, but it looks like in terms of overall win rate for the event, Briar does very well, has a bad matchup in Shaman, but what I was really surprised by here was actually Oldhim having a 33% win rate into Briar, given this is less than 10 games, so we just need way more data to solidify this, but at a Battle Hardened, seeing Briar go 6-3 into Oldhim is pretty interesting. I'm not exactly sure what the Oldhim lists were looking like and whether or not that would maybe explain this kind of gap here, because it is pretty fascinating that Briar had such a good win rate into Oldhim, but had such a bad win rate into Shaman, because Oldhim has Ice React and the ability to make Frostbites. But the data is pretty interesting. Valda didn't have that great of a performance, but it looks like that this was just one person who submitted it. So, because there's only 7 matches available in 7 rounds. Other than that, this kind of just clarifies everything that we talk about in terms of the meta representation, although it actually is really interesting that Chain actually had a 45% win rate. So despite the fact that Chain put 5 copies in the Japan top 8, put 2 copies in this top 8, including a conversion to first, his win rate's actually negative. It's negative into Briar, it's negative into Ira, Azalea, Bravo, and Oldhim. So I actually have no idea how it's doing so well. And the only thing that I can kind of conclude here is that I think it's actually just really good players that are playing Chain. Probably is a high skill cap deck. I'm assuming that some players probably brought it because they saw it do well in Japan and they played it, maybe didn't have enough reps required to beat some of these more technical matchups, maybe like the Guardians, for example, because supposedly if the deck was brewed to beat Guardian, it probably shouldn't have a 12% and a 25% win rate at the event into those two decks. So I can only wonder if there is a pilot issue going on here and whether or not this win rate will go up as more players get their hands on the deck. But players have had their hands on Azalea for a while now, so despite the fact that I think that they probably should still ban Death Dealer for the health of the game, it seems like that she's actually not performing as well as maybe we expected her to. But Briar is actually still doing incredibly well. It still feels like one of the best decks in the format, along with Ira just having a pretty even matchup, although I would like to see how Ira can maybe get this number up a little bit better, because having, a 40-60 into probably the most represented hero, not exactly the best way to win a tournament. So I'm hitting export on the video. It's all done. I'm just planning on covering the deck list on a different day. I refreshed the website. They're all available now. So here we are. We're going to keep on adding on to this video. So let's start with Chain, who won the event. And it looks like what we covered recently when I made my video of, top 5 decks to expect at the Silver Age Battle Hardened weekend. This was built off of the Japan list that was stacking some Rune Chans, playing Runegate Chain, and then trying to like triple Runegate in the end game. This looks very similar. Only things of note here are going to be 2 copies of Blessing the Occult Red, which is something I was not playing. I definitely like that inclusion if you're going to be wanting to stack a little bit more into the end game. Also, we're back to including Red Bounding Demagon, which makes sense. It probably helps you in some of your aggressive matchups. Just having the 0 for 4, that's pretty easy to play it at a 0 cost. And then actually a copy of Red Condemned to Slaughter, which is pretty nice. It actually pairs well with Arcane Cussing, although I'm not exactly sure all the spots the player was intending to use this in. One copy, I wonder if it's main board or if it's sideboard, but regardless, I do think that it pairs well with that and probably has some good edge in other matchups. And other than that, it looks pretty standard compared to what we've seen so far. And then we have the Briar list. The Briar list is really interesting. So we're going to come back to the equipment because this is what's worth talking about. The main deck itself is what we've seen and built on the channel, mainly just red line, playing the most efficient cards in red that we can. I do like that we're playing 1 copy of Jack Be Quick. Since we are playing the 2 copies of Nimbalism, you might as well get a little bit of a hedge with another 0 for 4 with Go Again occasionally. And we are on 2 copies of Reinforce Align, which I actually could see having a lot of merit. It's not truly a red line list. We're on 2 copies of Yellow Flourish, which I have seen other Briars playing, so I've been aware of this. I do actually like it a lot. It's basically just a 0 for 3, but allows you to have turns where through some kind of resource taxing, you're able to still send your weapon and not just like lose a whole card to play through the Frostbite or something like Cartilage Crush, anything like that. But other than that, everything else about this list is what you have seen and played against before. But the equipment's very interesting. So we have Scepter of Pain and Bloodied Ovals, so having the one-handed scepter with the oval offhands. But then we also have Blade Beckoner plating, but then we also have Reaping Blade and Starfall. So if the deck pilot or someone who knows the player would be able to fill me in here, I'd definitely be interested to hear what's going on in terms of sideboarding decisions with the equipment, because there's definitely a lot of different options here. You're looking at 3 different weapon setups. You're looking at 2 different chess piece, actually 3 different chess piece setups, because you also have Bodice. So I'm definitely very interested what's going on between all of this. I can see Bodice maybe being good into Azalea. As an Azalea pick, you're able to destroy like your own Inertia, your own Frailty, Blood Rot token, and make a resource. And at that point, it's just strictly better Garland to spring. Other than that, I'm not exactly sure what the choices are in terms of your overall matchup spread, like what matchups you would play Scepter, Pain, and Bloodied Oval. That would be a question for the person who played the list. Me looking at this, I can only speculate. And then we have Ira up next. We are in Kodachi, so that's interesting that we kind of start to see a little bit more that we're not playing Edge of Autumn, we're just playing Kodachis in the format. It's mainly how I was building the deck, but I was curious to see how other players would adapt the list if other Iras would end up opting for Edge of Autumn, so that way they're able to play the Vengeance cards that are available in the format. And we are in Mask of Many Faces. Definitely interested to know what the use case is for that over the Helm. Maybe it's just depending on the matchup. The overall deck list itself is actually pretty interesting. We see Life of the Party. I'm reacting to this in real time. Definitely pretty cool. There isn't Crazy Brew in the format, unfortunately. I guess maybe that's the combination of Mask of Many Faces. I'm now just catching this on the fly. I guess maybe you're just supposed to name a card as Crazy Brew with Mask and then pop it for Life of the Party. In that case, I'm interested in what matchups you want Blade Beckoner, or if Life of the Party is a sideboard card. So that's a question for Ian, not me. I'm just reacting to these in real time, but everything here outside of that, which is very cool tech, is definitely something that I've seen all before. I do like adding Sound the Alarm. I'm not exactly sure what decks you need it for though, since attack reactions, I think in the top heroes are not very common. Briar has none. Guardian doesn't have any, Chain doesn't have any. So I'm definitely interested in the inclusion of this. Maybe it's just another 1 for 5 that blocks for 3. So you're able to 2 card 8 with your 2 Kodachis off of a blue, and maybe the hand information is the most important part. I do like including Bluster buff. I think that's actually pretty sweet. We see 2 copies of Springboard, and then we just see a really big blue base. This is just, you know, mainly just filler. I do like, you know, cards like Legacy and Nip. Those are just easy ways to close out the game. Pouncing Key, Aspect of Tiger Mind, they all synergize really well with the equipments. And there will be worlds where you actually do play Rushing River because your Torrent of Tempo hits. Next up, we got another chain list here. Looks pretty standard so far. We'll go into the rest of the list. This looks pretty similar to what won the event. I do see Envelop though. I'm not exactly sure if the winning list was on Envelop. It doesn't look like it was, so I guess that is a notable difference between the 2 different versions. I see Springboard Somersault in here, so it's possible we're trying to play this a little bit more defensively. See Time Snap Potion and Blue Flying High, so definitely pretty interesting stuff to consider here. If you want to include a little bit more defensive tech, whether or not the Envelop is worth including in the list, but that's definitely notable differences between the 2. Next up, we have the Oldham list that was able to break into top 8. Right off the bat, I see Civic Peak. I have questions. Out of all of the Civic equipments, I feel like this is the one that has the biggest downside for you as the person blocking with it. So I'm very curious what the intent is for giving the other player a card. I'm definitely interested that this person was not on Civic duty as potential Ira tech, and they were instead playing Richter scale. And they're also on the gauntlets, where you can just pop them and give something +2. So let's go ahead and look at the rest of the list first and see if any of those questions are answered. So far, I'm not exactly getting an answer here. This looks like a pretty standard Oldham list. It definitely is very interesting having Lalo. I can only help but wonder what the margin is between playing this or playing something like Springboard Somersault, since Springboard is just a 0 for 4 reaction when it's played from your arsenal. Lalo, I guess, is worth 3 from hand, but it's still only worth 3 from arsenal. And Scar is actually pretty interesting to have in this deck. Everything else I think is pretty standard. The blue base looks pretty normal. Bastion seems to be Ira tech, including Sirens as well, so definitely a good call there. But now that I look at this list, I'm still not sure why Civic Peak was the helmet of choice. Question for the deck author, not for me. And then we see Bravo, Flattering Showman, on basically the entire Civic suite here. That's very interesting. I mean, Civic, Steps and Duty makes sense. Guide maybe can make sense. Peak is still just something I'm very, very confused about. So if somebody has an insight here, please let me know. And I was not, part of these testing groups, so I got no clue why we're playing an equipment that draws my opponent a card twice during a game. Maybe it's to mess with chain pitch stacking. Maybe you just play into Ira and just block within the late game when she just has all blues anyway and it doesn't matter. I'm very, very curious about this because now I've seen it twice. The first time it was like kind of, put me on high alert. And now I've looked at 2 lists in top 8 that are on this. The rest of this deck looks pretty close to, what I've seen and played against and built myself. Just a lot of good block force, good red attacks with Crush. You want to put an arsenal. Yeah, the Civic Peak thing is really, really fascinating to me. Someone needs to fill me in because I'm clearly out of the loop. Let's see if we see it again here. Okay, so we have Arthur's list here on Bravo. Okay, so we're back to no Civic Peak. So we're back to Blade Beckoner Helm. Maybe the world is making sense again. This is very standard from what I've seen in terms of the equipment suite. Richter scale works really well in Bravo. I was actually pretty curious that it was in the Oldham list. It definitely synergizes very well with Bravo. It looks like we're on some of the red suspense auras, so we have Edge of their Seats here. Other than that, this looks pretty similar to the list we just looked at. Okay, so we do have some of the yellow clashes, including a yellow boulder drop, which is pretty interesting. Maybe just wanting to include even more copies of this against the aggro decks. I could totally see it. We even have blue copies down here and a couple of different blue auras. I definitely like that. Good turn 1 equity. We have the last Briar list to round it out. We're seeing Beckoner Plating, Bodice, and Blossom Spring again. So similar to the first place list. So it seems like players are starting to adapt a lot of different chess pieces based on the matchups. I'm definitely interested when you would want Plating over the Blossom. And then we do see Reaping Blade and Starfall split up again. So definitely cool stuff going on here. Let's go ahead and look at the rest of the list. looks pretty close to the one that I got first, just no copy of Yellow Flourish. It looks like the choice was Photon Rush, so just choosing 0 for 3, go again in terms of a physical red, in terms of potential 0 for 3 in a non-attack yellow. I do like the 1 copy of Read the Runes, just having a little bit of turn 1 equity, but also being able to maybe stack a little bit, have an off turn into the silver decks. So overall, those are all the deck lists. So I'm going to have all these linked. You can go ahead and give them a shot. But as you are getting ready to prep for, let's say, the Silver Age Battle Hardened in Seattle, I definitely think that we can almost with certainty say what the top 5 most represented heroes are going to be, what decks you're going to be playing against in Top Cut, and what decks you're going to have to beat in the final rounds of Swiss if you want to have a shot at that top 8. So we can go into more of that later on, but this is just a quick recap of what happened at the weekend. But until next time, thank you for watching.